Welcome to Wholesale Change, the webcast and podcast from Distribution Strategy Group, where we offer thought leadership for wholesale change agents like you. Because if you're on this call, you probably are a wholesale change agent. My name's Ian Heller. I'll be your co-host today, along with the head honcho of heuristics and the doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bein, PhD. How you doing today, honcho?
Flattered, dude. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Always happy to be with you for this broadcast and otherwise. Yeah, we've got a very interesting topic today. We're going to talk about why losing customers costs you more than you think. And we both have a lot of experience at this. Me and my background running marketing departments for distribution companies, and you and your background consulting for many distribution companies with that great calculator brain of yours, the Excel brain you have. No comment?
I was calculating.
Ooh, that was good. That was good. Good. Well, we have to thank our sponsors before we move on with the show, because without them, this show would not be possible at all. So first, we want Oracle NetSuite for more than 20 years. Oracle NetSuite has helped organizations grow, scale, and adapt to unpredictable change with a unified true cloud platform. They especially enable fast-growing wholesale distribution companies to achieve operational excellence, manage margins and inventory, and support and expand their geographical footprint for years to come. NetSuite provides an integrated system that includes financials, ERP, HR management software, CRM, professional services automation, and omni-channel commerce. Most notably, though, is their demand planning and advanced inventory management capabilities used by more than 28,000 customers in 215 countries and dependent territories. Oracle NetSuite has worked with HVAC, electronics, electrical, furniture, home goods, and industrial supply and equipment companies, just to name a few. NetSuite is a true cloud solution that best fits for your wholesale distribution company. Thank you, NetSuite, for your support. You've been supporting us for quite a while. We really appreciate it. Also, another regular sponsor, Cavallo, is a distribution management solutions provider founded by an experienced distributor who spent 2 decades perfecting and optimizing a high-powered, user-friendly solution built for distributors. Cavallo offers a robust set of execution-based software that provides sales teams with critical customer information to speed up order processing with precise control over every order, including workflow automation to ensure efficiency and accuracy across all of your processes. You can also leverage Cavallo's state-of-the-art business intelligence platform to know in real time if an order is out of compliance or in jeopardy, and where you can improve to power your company's next big moves. Cavallo's data-driven approach has created the best case scenario for modern distributors, software that meets you where you're at with flexible on-premise and cloud options that empower users to take their next technological step at their own pace, no matter where you are in your technical journey. It's time to take control over your distribution business with software built for distributors without adding a new ERP. For more information on how to experience accelerated growth with Cavallo's business intelligence platform and its distribution management software, visit cavallo.com today. You know, Jonathan, these are both cloud-based companies, and I know we've got, the state of distribution technology coming up here in a few weeks or a month or whatever. Is all software just going to be cloud-based over time, Mr. PhD in computer science?
Almost entirely. I mean, there will be certain exceptions, but the trend is clear. The train has left the station. I mean, it's for most of these technologies, it's really starting to move into the late majority stage of adoption. You know, it's not an early majority or even what's the one before early majority, early adopter. It's not an early adopter thing. If you're using cloud, it's starting to move into late majority. So. Hey, we're going to have a great discussion today, and I want to remind everybody, please ask questions. There's a button at the bottom of the screen, I think for most of you, that says Q&A. Toss a question in there. If that is not visible to you, throw a question in the chat, and we'll try to answer it.
Yeah, and today's topic is, it's really about customer lifecycle value in general, but we're focusing specifically on churn customers. And what the challenge that distributors face versus what consumer marketers face is very different. You know, Jonathan, so for example, if you're, I don't know, a cell phone provider or cell phone service provider like Verizon, It's much easier for you than for a distributor, right?
Yeah, that's what would be considered a contractual setting, right? You have a contract with Verizon for a month-to-month contract, and actually they probably locked you in via other mechanisms. But that is a very different thing than in the B2B world of distribution. What a Verizon does, or a Comcast, or a Netflix, is they look at each month, they'll look at, for example, the probability of all of their customers churning or defecting or leaving, right? So for Verizon, they're ranking their customers 1 to 80 million. And then they might say, great, let's take the top 3 or 4% of those customers and let's do some type of intervention. Let's do some type of retention move. So in the cell phone world, it could be, we're going to accelerate the time to which you can get a new phone, or we're going to give you more anytime minutes. They've actually developed a science because they have enough data. They developed a science about predicting it and also figuring out the right intervention. But this is in a contractual setting. And that is a very different world than what we live in distribution, right? Because how do we observe? How do we notice when somebody has churned or defected in distribution? Ian?
Well, yeah, their behavior changes beyond what you would predict it to, beyond how you would predict it to change. So when you say contractual, it's subscription based, right? So you get the same amount of money every month for a long period of time. So it's easy for them to see a change. But if you got a customer that buys from you 6 times a year and there's very little pattern to the frequency in your distributor or the amount, that's a much harder prediction environment than the same amount every month, right?
That's right. Yeah, and then actually, if you look at that 6 orders a year versus 60 versus 600, those are kind of different problems within distribution. Your customers that are ordering 600 are churning at a much lower rate than your customers that are ordering 6 times a year. At least they should be. If they're not, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah. If your national accounts are the ones leaving, your major accounts, you've got a bigger problem than if it's, bottom decile customers.
That's right.
And so in B2B, it's harder to see defection risk. That means it's harder to predict defection risk.
Mm-hmm.
Transactions aren't consistent in terms of timing, amounts, product types. As customers get bigger, you see it's the law of large numbers. You see more standardization of data patterns, right?
Yes.
And so it's easier to predict. And yet we don't see much activity at most distributors in even trying to predict defection, right?
Yeah, and here's another contrast with the B2C world or the subscription world. In the B2C world, there are other factors besides purchasing that are used to predict defection. So for example, if we use the cell phone scenario again, they might notice that your quality of service is not good, or that you've made a number of service phone calls in. So in fact, they're looking primarily not at transactional things to predict defection, right? Whereas in distribution, you're looking at almost entirely transactional things. We don't really have a good way of tracking service incidents, for example, with our distribution customers, or other things relating to customer sat. I mean, I guess we could look at customer sat, but it's primarily a transactional thing. So yeah. I think, what you pointed out is in the subscription world, you have business and then it drops off a cliff. It goes from whatever the cash flow or the margin is to 0 instantaneously.
Right.
Practically in distribution, unless it's, a business that's selling to end customers who have project-based things and it's really lumpy or something, you tend to see a more gradual decrease. It might be they abandon purchasing a certain product category from you, or they purchase less of that product category. So as you start to think about understanding churn in distribution, you're looking at the macro. Are they still buying from you at all? And you should also be looking at the micro, right? If I've got 10 to 20 product categories at the top of my product taxonomy, am I noticing significant changes downward or upward in the purchase of those product categories by a given customer.
Yeah, I think another thing that I see with distributor customers who, defect is that they don't actually think of themselves as having defected.
Right. Right. I mean, they'll say, yeah, I'm still a customer.
Right.
They still consider themselves a customer.
Yeah. Every time I need that air compressor that that wears out in the back of my service truck, I come to you guys.
Yeah.
It just happens to be every 2 years.
Right. And actually, I love what you just said there, because that ties back to an idea that we've discussed before, that customers segment you. You are my air compressor provider, when in fact, I've got 17 other big product categories that I could be selling besides air compressors, but you think of me as the air compressor.
Yeah, I love that. I didn't come up with it, but that notion that not only do you segment customers, but they segment you and they pigeonhole you and they don't know what you carry, et cetera. But before we go on, Jonathan, and we're not going to try to do a real in-depth dive on this, but there are sort of 3 quick formulas related to customer lifetime value. One is cost of acquisition, because that's the other side of churn, right?
Mhm.
One is customer lifetime value,
Mhm.
and one is the power of 1%, right? And so can you just give us a quick overview? And if people, don't track or need this information, we can just send you a Word document that's got these formulas in them.
Absolutely. So cost of acquisition, this is something that's not well understood in the distribution world, cost of customer acquisition, right? There's been a lot of work in understanding cost to serve. There've been good models on that recently, but cost of acquisition is not something that's well understood. By the way, again, in comparison to the retail world or the B2C world, it's very well understood. They understand that, we're not going to get to a cash flow break even with a customer we acquire until 2 years into it. And based on that, we can make the whole thing work. A simple way to think about cost of acquisition is really 2 things. What is the number of first-time accounts you have, let's say, in a 1-year period? And then the second is, what is the cost of prospecting? And so it should involve sales and marketing. Practically, a lot of salespeople don't spend a lot of time prospecting.
Right.
So then you're saying, okay, to what extent is marketing spending time or money, resources, program dollars on prospecting? So that's your cost of prospecting over the number of first-time accounts. That's the way to think about it. Obviously, you can take more complicated and detailed analyses of the cost of prospecting. If you were able to include salespeople, great. But cost of prospecting over the number of first-time accounts. So that's the cost of customer acquisition. When we think about the customer lifetime value, and this is going to be at the single account level. So if you're looking at the company level, you're going to multiply by the number of accounts. You're going to look at the margin dollars, again, in a 1-year period. So let's say you're a $10,000 a year client, it's 25% margin. So the margin that margin dollars is 2,500 that company's generating. So the margin is a one key input to the customer lifetime value. The churn rate is another. So let's say you have a 25% churn rate. That's slightly on the high side. That means, every 4 years, you're going to turn over your entire customer base, right? You're losing 25% a year. And then the third is what we just discussed before, the cost of customer acquisition. That's a dollar amount. So the three components are the margin dollars, the churn rate percentage, and then the acquisition costs. And one thing is, if we want to understand the exponential power of the exponential gift that keeps on giving exponentially, it is retention, right? Yeah. Just going up 1% in customer retention is going to generate 6% higher customer lifetime value, or 5. And actually, as you start to go up, as you go from like 85 to 86% to 87%, you get even a higher lift in the increase in customer lifetime value.
Now, how does that compare to increasing prices by 1%?
In most cases, it's going to be the stronger move. Getting a point of retention is better than getting a point of a margin increase, and that's an astounding thing, right? So I mean, as you look at this equation, margin, retention, and acquisition costs, you can play with all three, right?
Right.
You know, what can we do to drive our cost of customer acquisition down?
Right.
Hint: get really good at marketing. Right.
Yeah.
What can we do to drive our margin up? Well, you know, there's a lot of ways you could do that. You could sell more and bigger products. You could do things with pricing. You know, there's a bunch of things you could do to increase the margin flow that you're getting. But then the third one, which is the most powerful lever, is retention.
So I'm interested in your perspective on this. So several months ago, we both spoke at the same conference, and in breakout sessions, I probably had 150 people in my session. And I asked, how many of you here know how many customers you lost last year? And maybe 20 hands went up. Okay. Out of 150. I said, okay, for those of you who still have your hands up, how many of you have a goal for the number of customers you'll lose this year? And I would say at least half of them went down. And then I asked, how many of you have somebody who is specifically responsible for hitting the number of lost customers this year that you just said you had? There were like 1 or 2 hands still up. So out of 150 distributors, the number that were, you know, people, maybe there was fewer distributors, but it's probably 100 distributors anyway. How many of you have a goal with somebody in charge of it for customer defection this year? So my question to you, Jonathan, is how do you think that would compare if you ask people who has a margin goal for this year, who has people who are directly responsible for your margin goal going up this year?
That's a much larger percentage of people, right?
Right.
I mean, it's essentially like a chief profit officer role, right? I mean, it might fall under finance, might fall under operations, but that's going to be 20 to 1.
Yeah. And there are many people who have that goal, right? So every sales rep, every manager, every district manager, every regional manager, the CFO, the CEO, they all have this goal about margin. But you're saying retention is more powerful in most cases, but there are no goals around that in many companies, as we've seen over and over again. Is that because it's harder to get precise data and there's less confidence around the measurement? Is that because people don't understand the value of this? What do you think is the source of that difference between those two, you know, types of numbers?
I think one thing that you and I discussed in prepping for this was really great insight, which is that distributors don't tend to do loss leaders, right?
Right.
You want to expound on that whole dynamic that you've seen and what goes on there?
Yeah, but I think that's part of the same. I think that stems from the same issue. If you don't understand, so it's harder to measure the value of retention versus the value of 1%, right? Because 1% comes right through the income statement. Distributors are very comfortable with income statements, and at every level, right? Everyone understands an income statement. It's much simpler than a balance sheet, and even more so than a cash flow statement. And so if I can put 1% in there, I can just calculate, wow, if I'm in a 10%, you know, bottom line environment, 1% at the top is a 10% improvement at the bottom, right? That's easy. Everybody understands that. The retention numbers are harder to calculate. The onboarding numbers are harder to calculate. Now, in environments where it's easier to calculate, like cell phone subscriptions, they do loss leaders all the time. You don't get cell phones aren't free, right? But they're willing to invest in getting you the hardware. Well, some of it they get paid for in the subscription, but they do not make money on the hardware. They make money on the subscription, and they're willing to do loss leaders around hardware to get you to subscribe. In distribution, since those numbers are harder to know, they're very reluctant, and they're less sophisticated generally in marketing anyway than consumer companies. You know, I've in every distributor I've worked for or consulted with, man, trying to get people to do a loss leader to get a return on lifetime value is like you're doomed before you start.
And I think that's part of a broader thing of these B2C examples. They really understand cost of customer acquisition, right? like a phone company understands it takes a fair bit to get a customer, right?
Right.
And we're not going to see a return until, month 8 of year 2. They get that, but they know that the churn rate is, 14% or whatever the number is, and getting to a cash flow break even in month 6 of year 2, that works because we really understand customer lifetime value. And I think that also ties back to this broader phenomenon of distributors being unwilling to invest in marketing. They don't think about customer lifetime value. They don't think about cost of customer acquisition.
Yeah, we had a whole show on marketing by objectives recently on wholesale change, right?
Yeah.
And we talked about how important it is to put someone in charge of those numbers, like new customers, defected customers, average order value, that kind of stuff. And we had a lot of feedback from that show because I think that those concepts are new to most distribution executives. But when it comes to, churn, I guess I'm a little surprised that people aren't more obsessed with it. So when I got to Whitecap Construction Supply in 2010, I was a VP of marketing, and I asked for 5 years of data. All I wanted to know is active number of accounts per year. So for 12 months, for like 2006, 2007, 2008, whatever it was. And it was like this, right? It was more in 2006, fewer in 2007, fewer in 2008, fewer in 2009. It was, and so I did this dramatic looking, not exaggerated, just this turned out to be a dramatic looking PowerPoint slide. And I titled it, "This is our going out of business line." Okay. Because if you stay on that trajectory, that's what's going to happen. And it caused this huge reaction in the company. And we got the whole company focused on acquiring new customers, but we also got them focused on not losing any customers.
Right.
And if marketing is not going to teach the whole company to be obsessed with that, then probably no one is.
I think that's exactly right. And that's probably the first time you ever did anything provocative like that, right?
That day.
Yeah, that day.
I like to say I spent my entire corporate career. I was a VP at 5 publicly held companies, 4 distributors. I spent my whole corporate career on the razor's edge between being promoted and being fired.
Nice.
Yeah, only got fired once. That's pretty good.
Good deal. So I think also, it's really important to not view this as a one size fits all. The smallest distributor has got 100 times as many SKUs as Verizon Mobile, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so you need to think about the churn for your top decile customers, the top 10% by sales volume of your customers, differently than you think about the churn for the next 10%, the second decile of your customers, differently than you think about churn for the bottom 80%. I would put it in those 3 bins.
Okay, so it's the top decile.
Yep, top 10%.
Top 10%, and then second 10%.
Yep.
But then after that, the curve flattens out so quickly, you would, generally speaking, based on the many distributor data sets you've looked at,
yep,
you would say the bottom 8 deciles or bottom 7 deciles, you would sort of treat the same.
Correct.
Okay. So what do you do differently for the top versus the bottom?
Well, you just have a different expectation. So if you look, if you say I've got an overall number of 15% churn,
right,
that's less interesting, or that's less actionable than saying for my top decile, I've got 4% churn. For my second decile, I've got 12% churn. For my bottom 8 deciles, I've got 28% churn.
Because 1% in the top decile may be bigger than 100% in the bottom 5 deciles.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And so if you've got this top decile group, it's very valuable to your company. But by the way, when you do deciles, do you decile them on sales, on gross margin dollars? Do you ever take into account service costs? I mean, how do you go about that?
Any and all of the above. But I think for this purpose, you could probably do it by sales dollars or by gross profit dollars.
Right. We do have a comment from someone in chat here. Let's see. Agree with the idea of segmenting by volume, as there is also complexity around size of customer and ordering patterns. For our large enterprise customers that order daily, if they go a week without ordering, that is concerning. Completely agree, right?
Yeah, but I think there's maybe a deeper thing that's being alluded to here. So we mentioned by size, but you could also do it by segment. We had a PVF distributor as a client, a consulting client of ours once, and they had industrial PVF and they had contractor PVF. Those are very, very different segments, very, very different characteristics. To the point of this comment, there were different ordering patterns. So there are definitely sort of industry specific nuances in understanding what constitutes churn, right?
Right.
I mean, think about the whole contractor world.
Right.
It may be very lumpy, even within a year.
Yeah, I finished my project. I don't have one right now, so I'm not buying from you. That doesn't mean I don't like you.
That's right.
And so I guess in my experience, Jonathan, when we looked at these, as we got attention to this going out of business line, and by the way, we totally turned it around. The whole company got obsessed with it. And I could go into that later, but the number of customers grew manyfold, all right, over 7 years. But we had different strategies for reacting to big customers who looked like who were exhibiting defection behavior, churn behavior, versus small customers. And it kind of matches with your general application of marketing communication tools based on customer size. In other words, your biggest customers get a sales rep.
That's right.
The next one's down, if you have it, they get a telephone-based sales rep. The maybe a little bit below that, somebody from the branch calls, because it's not assigned to any salesperson, but you ask the branch people to follow up. That's hard to make happen in a structured way. But the other thing we did is in marketing, we direct mailed or emailed all of them. And one of the things I want to blow up two things around marketing offers, right? So I have for years battled two notions. One, that you shouldn't price things. I price things in everything I can get away with. Now, if it's a pure commodity, I might put call for price on a few things, but that needs to be the exception, not the rule, right? And I fought it like mad. Like I was just in a distributor branch 2 weeks ago. They didn't have any prices on anything. I said, why don't you price things? Well, because our ask price is much different than the price that most people get, and we don't want to discourage them from making a purchase. I said, what discourages them from making a purchase is the potential embarrassment of taking something up to the counter, finding out it's more than they want to pay, and then having to carry it back. It's also a waste of time for them. Right. And there's this big, I pointed this one thing that would be hard for me to know what the price was. I wouldn't have known if it was $20 or $100. Right. I said, what you can do is go ahead and price everything on your displays and then have signs on all the fixtures that say contractor pricing available. And then they'll know, oh, this is not my price. This is just the ask price. But I do know that if this thing says $30, it's not $100. I may get
order of magnitude.
Right. Order of magnitude. And the same is true in catalogs, contractor pricing available. Same is true on websites. But so that's one notion I want to blow up, is that I think you should price everything. And I defy or challenge anyone to tell me that they've got data that proves that that's the wrong decision, because I've done it over and over and over again. People do not respond to unpriced offers. They just don't. Here's the second thing. I don't want to send those offers to my biggest customers, because they're first, they have a salesperson, and secondly, they get much bigger discounts. And so everything's way overpriced in my offer for them. You know what? Those customers know they get much bigger discounts. The order of magnitude thing still works for them. And your goal there is to educate them about what you carry, because they have segmented you. Remember what you said earlier, around a relatively narrow set of products, and you've got to expand their impression of you, break out of that box that they've got you trapped in by showing them the other things that you carry. And the way you do that is by constantly hitting them with offers for products that they didn't know you carried. And so this notion of not pricing, and this notion of not pricing to national accounts or not mailing to these big accounts, I completely disagree with it. And I've got the data. I developed data over years and years to show that it's incorrect. And I eventually win people over once they try it, but they have these built-in biases that I just think are wrong. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
That says something coming from you, because I know if you disagreed, you tell me.
That's part of our partnership, brother.
I know.
Well, I think the other thing is looking at, as we start to shift into the discussion about what you can do in response. So if we look at the B2C world, you've got two things you can play with. You can play with price, you can play with value, right?
Yeah,
you were just alluding to price.
Yep.
They play with value, right? They will accelerate the time frame in which you can get a new phone. They will give you more, text messaging, whatever. So they're going to give you more value rather than play with price. What have you seen in distribution? Is it more with price, or is it is there a way to provide more value?
I think it's harder for distributors because they already give away almost all their services to most customers, which is a big mistake. And in fact, we just had a column go out this week about, ways you can break out of that box that you helped me. Well, not under my byline, but you helped me figure out sort of the approaches to take a free service and then make it a revenue generator over time. And that's not just to generate revenue for the service. It's so that if you decide to give it away to somebody, it has inherent value, right? So years ago when I was at Granger, emergency service was free and we got overloaded, and branch managers would start avoiding their phone calls on the weekend because they get these nonsense emergency calls. And we put in place a $50 fee. So if you want someone to show up at the branch off hours, it costs $50. And then we waived it for our national accounts. So it didn't mean anything to them before. It was just like, okay, great, everybody gets it. But now we're saying, hey, everybody else, we charge $50 to go to the branch. I mean, today it'd probably be $100. It's a long time ago. Now it's free for you. But then we went one step farther, Jonathan, and we said, we suggest that in your RFP for a national provider of MRO supplies, you put in a requirement that they have to have 24-hour emergency service. So it made it a differentiator, right? It also won loyalty. I mean, we had a lot of customers that their first experience with us was this $50 emergency service, right? And the thing that kept them coming back was they would come to us because they knew we would service them. And so you started getting more frequency. And by the way, we would pay that money to the person who opened the branch, and then people were signing up for it. So it was, the Jim Collins flywheel effect, right? And I think, the getting services priced and so you can monetize them is great, but it also establishes inherent value that you can use to hold on to customers.
What are other things that we can do to improve retention and customer lifetime value?
The number one thing is offer frequency.
Okay.
There's a correlation between how frequently you put offers in front of customers and how frequently they buy from you. And they can be email offers, they can be print offers. No one thinks that an email to a customer is as good as a phone call, or even a fraction and much less valuable than a sales call, but it's 100% better than nothing.
Well, so a corollary to this would be category expansion, right? Because what you're talking about should result in category expansion.
Yes, right. If you ping somebody with enough frequency, you don't want to get them to unsubscribe. So that speaks to relevance. And this is something I think marketers sometimes don't understand. High relevance builds more tolerance to offer frequency. So I love motorcycles and I love photography. You can send me offers every day on those two things, and I'm not going to unsubscribe from you because I like that stuff. Don't send me offers on toddler clothes because my kids are grown up and I don't have any grandkids. Right? So my tolerance for frequency for stuff that's not relevant to me is very low. My tolerance for frequency, that stuff that is relevant to me, is very high. So the more you can segment your audience and your offers and send safety offers to the safety director, right? Then the better off, then the more tolerance you'll have for offer frequency. So I think that's number one. What do you see?
I'm going to ask you for number two on improving retention and CLV.
Onboarding, better onboarding. It's a big deal when someone buys from you for the first time. You should treat it as a celebration, have a welcome party for them, if you will, even if it's just a welcome to the club kit, welcome to the company kit, thank you for your first purchase. Because you can comment on this. Your most likely to churn customer is the first time buyer.
100%, because the first time buyer is kind of like the Minotaur, half person, half
Yeah.
cow. Is it a cow?
So I think it's a horse.
It's a horse. Okay. It was some hoofed animal. So your first time buyer is really kind of half customer, half prospect. It's not until they get into that repeat purchase pattern. And when you look at customer data, you'll probably find that 15 to 25% of the folks that have bought in the last year are one-time buyers. 15 to 25%. That's from looking at literally billions of dollars of transaction data. It's that kind of a number.
And you'll find that most distributor marketers made no effort to onboard those customers. Okay,
so celebrate the new customer with as they buy.
That's how they should do it. From your point of view, you're sinking your meat hooks onto them and pulling them on board.
Okay. What else?
Well, we referred to this earlier. I think loss leaders, if you can do the math and get people to buy it, and you're not going to do loss leaders to 1 million prospects at one time, but you should start testing it until you find something that works, right? And you can mitigate the damage of this by getting some kind of pricing concession from manufacturers sometimes who, they want you to switch a customer from another brand of theirs. But if 100% of your marketing has to earn a acceptable margin, a profitable margin every single time, it's really hard to prospect.
So I'm imagining another objection from a distributor to doing this is, aren't I just going to be conditioning price buyers to buy from me?
Well, I think, yeah, right. I mean, look, I think there's a long path from we do some loss leaders to get people to buy for the first time or increase frequency to, hey, we're going to, teach our audience, to our customers, to wait for discounts. Look, there's some people that are only going to buy from you. You're going to have some unprofitable customers. If you have none, then you're leaving money on the table with insufficient prospecting, marketing, and offers. So you can't prevent it from 100%, but with a little bit of targeted loss leader activity, you can onboard more customers.
That makes sense. What about if I'm the primary supplier versus the secondary supplier for a customer? How should I think about that as it relates to churn and what level of effort I put into servicing and marketing and retaining that customer?
Well, I think you have to ask, is this customer big enough to be worth pursuing? Right.
Okay.
And then secondly, you have to consider, is there a possibility I can be this customer's largest supplier? I mean, if I'm an HVAC dealer, this customer is a distributor, this customer is a Lennox dealer and I don't carry Lennox, then the odds of me becoming that primary supplier are very low. You'd have to switch to my brand of furnaces and AC equipment, right?
So when we look at a lot of the customers in the bottom 8 deciles, they are going to be secondary customers who cannot become primary.
I don't know. I mean, some of it's, I don't know that, I don't think I agree with that, but I would say you'd have to know more about your customers to know. Mm-hmm. In my experience, Jonathan, the thing that drives primary supplier choice is the outside sales rep, primarily, mm-hmm. if there is one. For all the bashing of outside sales reps that occurs, I disagree. Good outside sales reps can win over customers from competitors and hang on to them against competitors' advances. So the big accounts you really need good outside sales with. But for the most part, if you're not their primary supplier, it's either because there are practical reasons that you don't carry the stuff that they need, or they just don't have the familiarity with you. And however, I would say many or most of them are potentially in a position to make you, or a lot of them are, to make you their primary supplier. What do you think?
I like what you said prior to this. I mean, I like what you said just now, but I like what you said prior to this, which is you need to figure out whether you can be the primary supplier. I think if you look at that bottom 8 deciles, there's a lot of people for whom you are the secondary supplier. The primary supplier was out, right? And they came to you, and you are the secondary supplier for them. The question is, what portion of those customers can you convert to becoming the primary supplier for them?
I think you need to do your own data analysis. I mean, look, we're down the road from just the basics of, hey, if I were to sum this up, and we're probably ready to sum this up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Understand the economics around customer acquisition and retention. Just understand it. Do the math. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the fact that it's hard to do means if you do it, you'll have an advantage over most of your competitors who won't.
Right.
Then set some goals. What are your goals for new customers? What are your goals for lost customers? And then set in some basic strategies to detect when someone exhibits churn behavior and have some basic mechanisms to respond, even if it's just to, send an email, maybe a wellness check email. Hey, we haven't heard from you for a while. Is everything okay? If you have a complaint or we screwed up, please let me know. To, hey, sales rep, this is a big account. They haven't bought in 5 weeks. What's going on? Can you reach out to them? So I think just have the basic measurements in place and have the basic response mechanisms in place and have some goals in place with somebody responsible for them. You don't have to get to all this other more advanced stuff right now to be ahead of your competitors. Does that make sense? It
makes all the sense in the world. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the joke about the guys in the forest.
Right. Yeah.
The one, they see a bear?
Yeah.
And the one guy starts to put on his tennis shoes.
Right.
The other guy says, "You don't think you're going to outrun the bear, do you?" He says, "No, I just have to outrun you."
Exactly. Right.
So,
right. You just have to be better than your competitors.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to wrap up, but I want to tell you about two very important programs that are coming up. March 23rd, we have Ravi Shankar, who teaches at the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business. Brilliant guy. We previewed his presentation. It's very exciting. It's on managing supply chain disruptions. He had so much material. We're going to do two parts. The first one's on March 23rd. I'll co-host with Ravi. It's fascinating material. Hope you'll join us. That's brought to you by Cavallo, Connexium, and Epicor. Then in the next episode of the Wholesale Chain Shows on March 30th, we'll be honored to host Paul Kennedy, who's the CEO of Dakota Supply Group. And they're interesting, Jonathan, because they pursue multiple verticals, right? HVAC, electrical, plumbing.
And they're growing at a really significant rate. I mean, he's really got them on a good trajectory.
Yeah, they grew 20% net of inflation last year.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's brought to you by Oracle NetSuite and also by Cavallo. So thank you to our sponsors. You can go to distributionstrategy.com and click on events to sign up for these programs or others. If you have any questions about today's program or other programs or materials you get from Distribution Strategy Group, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer you. Our phone numbers and email addresses are at the bottom of the screen. Jonathan, as always, it's been great hosting with you, my friend.
Mutual. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you next week for Managing Supply Chain Disruptions Part 1. Bye, everybody.